Have you ever wondered how an Amish household with 8 children manages to spend less on food, clothing, energy, and household maintenance than a modern American family of 4 using no coupons, no discount apps, no financial advisor, and no strategy more complicated than the habits their grandparents taught them? Can everything you grow? Amish families preserve food through canning on a scale that most modern households find difficult to imagine. Research documented in the book Nature and the Environment in Amish Life found that some Amish communities can up to 1,000 quarts of food per year per household: green beans, tomatoes, corn, beets, carrots, peaches, pickles, and in some communities, meat. The economics are straightforward. Produce purchased out of season at a grocery store costs significantly more than produce grown in a summer garden and preserved in August. A jar of home-canned green beans that costs pennies to produce replaces a grocery store purchase that would cost several dollars. Multiply that difference across 1,000 quarts, and the savings reach into the hundreds of dollars per year. Line dry your clothes. The average electric dryer costs between $150 and $200 per year to operate. The Amish do not own electric dryers. They line dry every item of clothing, every towel, every bedsheet, in every season on outdoor clotheslines in warmer months and on indoor drying racks in winter. The practice requires a clothesline, which costs almost nothing. Across a year, it eliminates a utility cost that most American households pay without thinking about it and without realizing they have a free alternative that works equally well. Processed food markup. The processed food industry charges a markup for the convenience of not having to combine flour, eggs, butter, and sugar yourself, of not having to chop vegetables or mix spices. The Amish do not pay this markup. Every meal is cooked from basic ingredients: flour in 50-pound bags, eggs from their own chickens, vegetables from the garden or canning shelf, meat from the farm. Cooking from scratch reduces food costs by between 30 and 50% compared to a diet that relies on packaged convenience food. For a family spending $500 per month on groceries, a 30% reduction is $150 per month, $1,800 per year, achieved not through coupons, but through the simple practice of buying basic ingredients and combining them in the kitchen. The 50-pound oat bag principle. The per unit cost of any staple food item is always lower when purchased in larger quantities. A 50-pound bag of rolled oats purchased from a bulk food store costs a fraction of the per-ounce price of the same oats in a small grocery store canister. The same principle applies to flour, rice, dried beans, sugar, and salt. Amish families buy in bulk because their large households consume in bulk, but the principle does not require a family of 8 to generate savings. Any household that consumes a staple regularly enough to use a bulk quantity before it spoils captures the same savings. A household that buys the same items in small packages every week is paying a convenience premium every week for the convenience of not having to store a larger quantity, which costs almost nothing to solve with a shelf or a container. Repair before you replace. The modern consumer economy is organized around replacement. When something breaks, buy a new one. The Amish economy is organized around repair. When something breaks, fix it. This difference produces a significant difference in annual household expenditure. A tool that gets repaired costs the price of the repair often nothing if the household member has the skill. A tool that gets replaced costs the full purchase price plus disposal. Amish households maintain tools across decades. A well-maintained hand tool can last a working lifetime, representing a capital expenditure made once rather than repeatedly. The repair-first mentality extends to shoes, furniture, clothing, and every other item the household depends on. Shoes that are resold last years longer. Furniture that is repaired serves across generations rather than across product cycles. The annual saving reaches into the hundreds of dollars without requiring anything more expensive than basic repair skills and the decision to use them.
Grow a garden. Every Amish home has a garden. The size varies. A farm household may cultivate a large plot that produces the majority of the family's vegetable and fruit consumption, while a household in a more constrained space maintains a smaller garden that covers a portion of it. What is consistent across every Amish household is the presence of the garden and the understanding that growing food is always cheaper than buying it. A packet of tomato seeds costs approximately $2 and produces plants that yield 20 to 30 pounds of tomatoes across a growing season. 20 pounds of tomatoes purchased at a grocery store costs between $20 and $40 depending on the season and the variety. The return on the $2 seed investment is 10 to 20 times the input cost, a return that no financial product available to ordinary investors comes close to matching. The same calculation applies to green beans, cucumbers, zucchini, herbs, lettuce, peppers, and every other vegetable that a household consumes regularly and that a garden produces reliably. The Amish family that grows its own vegetables and preserves the surplus through canning eliminates a significant portion of its grocery bill at the cost of seeds, soil amendment, and the labor of family members who treat gardening as a productive family activity rather than a chore to be avoided. A household without land for a full garden can begin with containers on a patio or balcony and capture a portion of the same savings at essentially no startup cost. Sow, mend, and pass down. The Amish approach to clothing is governed by a principle that eliminates the clothing budget as most modern households understand it. New clothing is sewn by the women of the household from fabric purchased in bulk. Worn clothing is mended rather than discarded. Children's clothing is passed down from older to younger siblings until it is genuinely beyond use, and when it reaches that point, it becomes something else. Worn-out fabric becomes cleaning rags. It becomes quilt batting. It becomes the raw material for the rag rugs that cover Amish floors. Nothing is thrown away until it has been used in every form it can still usefully take. The economic impact of this approach on the annual clothing budget is significant. The average American household spends approximately $1,800 per year on clothing, a figure that includes the fast fashion purchases, the children's clothing that is outgrown before it wears out, and the adult clothing discarded because its style has changed, rather than because it has stopped functioning. An Amish household spends a fraction of this figure because it has separated the clothing budget from the replacement cycle that drives modern clothing expenditure. Clothing in an Amish household is replaced when it wears out, not when the season changes, not when a new style appears, not when a child outgrows it before a younger sibling can use it. The saving across a family of 8 across a year is not a small number. Buy secondhand first. The Amish default for any major purchase is secondhand before new, a practice that applies to furniture, tools, farm equipment, household goods, and virtually every other significant expenditure the household faces. The logic is the same logic that applies to every other Amish purchasing decision. Why pay the full retail price for a new item when a used version of the same item is available at a fraction of the cost and performs the identical function? Amish communities are surrounded by the infrastructure that makes secondhand purchasing practical: farm auctions, community sales, the network of relationships within the church district, through which items that one household no longer needs move to households that do. A piece of furniture purchased secondhand at an auction for $20 performs the same function as the same piece purchased new at a retail store for $200. The difference between those two prices is not the furniture's utility to the household. It is the markup that the retail system charges for the convenience of buying new, for the packaging, for the marketing, and for the manufacturer's profit margin. The Amish decline to pay this markup as a matter of consistent practice rather than occasional opportunism. When every major household purchase runs through the secondhand market first, and new is only considered when secondhand is genuinely unavailable, the cumulative annual saving across a household's full range of expenditures is substantial, and the quality of what the household owns is often higher, not lower, because older handmade items frequently outlast their modern factory-produced replacements. Pay cash only. The Amish do not use credit in the way that modern American households use it as a routine mechanism for purchasing things they cannot currently afford, with the intention of paying over time at interest. The Amish pay cash. If they do not have the money for something, they do not buy it until they do. This is not a financially sophisticated strategy. It is the oldest and simplest financial discipline available. Spend only what you have, and do not borrow money that you will have to pay back at a premium. The cost of consumer debt in a typical American household is significant and largely invisible because it is distributed across monthly minimum payments that feel manageable in isolation but are substantial in aggregate. The average American household carries approximately $6,000 in credit card debt. At an average interest rate of 20%, that debt costs approximately $1,200 per year in interest charges. Money that purchases nothing, produces nothing, and exists only because the household spent money it did not have and agreed to pay a premium for the privilege. The Amish household that pays cash eliminates this cost entirely. It also eliminates the psychological and practical overhead of managing debt, the minimum payment calculations, the balance tracking, the interest rate negotiations, the financial anxiety that debt produces in households that carry it across years. The cash-only discipline requires nothing more complicated than the decision to not spend money that is not already in hand. The Amish have been making that decision for 300 years. Pool resources with neighbors. The Amish community's practice of sharing resources among neighbors and church district members produces a specific financial benefit that most modern households never capture the elimination of individual ownership costs for. Items that multiple households use infrequently, but that each household would otherwise need to purchase separately. A specialized tool that one household uses twice a year, and that costs $200 to purchase, new costs $67 per household when 3 families purchase it together and share access to it. A piece of equipment that sits unused in a shed for 11 months of the year represents a capital expenditure that produced 11 months of idle storage cost. When 3 households share that equipment, each bears 1/3 of the purchase cost and 1/3 of the storage footprint, and the item is available to all 3 whenever any of them needs it. The Amish community's dense network of relationships built through decades of church attendance, barn raisings, frolics, and daily community life makes this kind of resource sharing practical in a way that it is not practical for modern households, living in subdivisions where they do not know their neighbors well enough to propose a shared tool. Purchase. The trust required for resource sharing is a byproduct of the community relationships that the Amish maintain for reasons entirely unrelated to financial efficiency. The financial benefit arrives as a secondary consequence of a community that was built for other reasons and that happens to produce, among its many other outputs, a neighborhood where everybody knows what everybody else has and is willing to lend it. The 10 habits described in this video are not innovations. They are not life hacks in the sense that the word is usually used clever workarounds discovered recently by people looking for edges in a complex system. They are the ordinary practices of a community that has been managing household economies carefully and sustainably for 300 years. Practices so embedded in the Amish way of life that no Amish household thinks of them as strategies. They are simply what you do. You can the food because that is what you do with garden surplus. You line dry the clothes because that is what you do with wet laundry. You cook from scratch because that is what cooking means. You repair the tool because that is what you do when something breaks. The habits are not difficult. None of them require special equipment, special knowledge, or special circumstances. The clothesline requires a length of rope and 2 anchor points. The garden requires a patch of soil and a packet of seeds. The bulk purchase requires a container for storage and the decision to buy more at once. The mending requires a needle and thread. The cash discipline requires the decision not to spend money that is not there. What makes these habits unusual in a modern American context is not that they are difficult, but that they have been systematically replaced by appliances marketed as improvements, by processed food marketed as convenience, by credit marketed as flexibility, by the assumption that newer and easier is always better.